fellow since 2002.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting us. Actually, we're not really going to speak about the Uttaratantra as we thought, but we are going to speak about our book, what we have just published, like 1 month ago, and it's a translation of a Gyu Lama. So Patrick, Carré, and myself would like to share some insights from our conjoined work on this recently published translation of a Gyu Lama, following Jamgon Kongtrul's commentary generally studied in the Kagyu tradition, and which we called the uncontestable lion's roar. So we will not focus directly on the contents of the text, but on our approach to its translation and our willingness to convey the experiential flavor in line with the meditational or contemplative tradition of the Uttaratantra initiated by the two translators, Zugawe Dorje and Sen Kawoche, from Sajjana, of course, and emphasized in Kongtrul's introduction and commentary. So this book contains 3 texts, actually: the root stanzas of the Gyu Lama, Jamgon Kongtrul's commentary called Chemi Dokpa Senging Aro, the uncontestable lion's roar, and his introduction to his commentary, a very nice introduction, we probably know, all of you, which is like a real essay, covering 8 subjects: the nature of his teaching, its sources, its author, its successive lineages, what is being explained, how it is explained, the synopsis of the treatise, the purpose and importance of what's being explained. So Kongtrul's commentary is famous for being a copy of Dolpopa's Leksheni Meose, and his introduction, although personal, is inspired very much by Bhutan, Taranatha, and Godotsawa. Kongtrul's commentary has been translated into English, as you know, by Rosemary Fuchs and Khenpo Tsotrym Gyatso Rinpoche, and published in Buddha Nature. Kongtrul's introduction has been translated by Mrs. Shempen Hukam, and thank you very much for your translation of this introduction, because the first time I read it, I did not read the text by Kongtrul Rinpoche, I didn't understand much. And thanks to the translation, really, it was very helpful. So thank you very much. And so I'm sure you're all very familiar with these books, but you may not be with the French translations of the Gyu Lama, which are usually outnumbered in the vast ocean of English literature on the subject. So at the start of the project, there were only 2 existing French translations of the Gyu Lama, and only one was published. And a third one came out of press 1 year before our book. So the first one is from François Chénic, Derby 2001, who is the pioneer. By the way, all these translations are from a Shentong interpretation. So he published the first translation of Ratnavardhana from Sanskrit and Tibetan. One of the main interests of this book is that he gives the original stanzas, Sanskrit stanzas, and the Tibetan translation by Loden Sherab. There's also a word-by-word translation of each term in both languages. Then there's a final translation that renders the complete meaning of each stanza. And also Mr. Chénic gives very interesting personal explanations for beginners in the Tathāgatagarbha studies, and what he calls excursus, where he makes parallel between Buddhism and Christianity or Greek antiquity. There's also a very interesting appendix that explains the prosody and the metrics of the text. So the individual translation of a stanza are usually quite satisfying, although we can say the overall translation of a treatise can be seen as defective in terms of meaning and readability. This book is called The Message, of the Next Buddha. Sometimes this message we found doesn't really get across. And also it's also debatable that you can call it the message from the future of the next Buddha, as it is, after all, Buddha Shakyamuni's message, which is just being revealed by the 10th Grand Bodhisattva. So anyway, it's still a very useful book for whoever wants to start studying the Uttaratantra and wants to know exactly what each word means. The second one, Etienne Loyon, 2012, who is also a student of the Venerable Khenpo Tsotrym Gyatso Rinpoche, who is not accountable for these translations, although his teachings seem to have inspired both of them. So this Translation has not been published, and it's only available on the internet, but in a very disorderly way. It's not very easy to find it. Sometimes you can lose it. It's difficult. So once again, Jamgon Kongtrul's commentary is put at stake, and its name here is the ineluctable lion's roar, which and Gyula Ma has become ultimate continuity, I think. So the choice of ineluctable for is as a proper translation for Chimi Dokpa, which means here irrefutable or uncontestable. So it might not be the right translation for it. So. And so Mr. Loyon is also is writing in a very formal way, and sometimes it's quite difficult to read also. Sometimes the style is very elegant, and sometimes it is not so. So as a result, the text sounds a bit foreign and unclear. And also there is not much textual information for further studies. The third one, Marc Agathe, Claire Lumière, published by Claire Lumière in 2018, as Mr. Agathe has recently published 3 translations in French related to the Tathāgatagarbha, the Gyula Ma, the Srimala Devi Sutra, and the Tathāgatagarbha Sutra. So one can feel a real progress from the 2 previous translations in terms of expression, readability, and accuracy. Mr. Agathe has also tried to inject some rhythm in his translation of the stanzas and to find a proper balance between accuracy and elegance. Still, we observe a strong influence of English-speaking terms from his readings and the translation of technical terms, and an overuse of passive structures, in which we are told, if you want to write good French, this is the first thing you have to cancel, all the passive structures that you might find. So I have found some, I like his translation of Gautra. For Gautra, he used filiation, which we borrowed from for our book. Filiation, is in French, it means a family tie that connects a human being to his or her ascendants, like a prince, to a king, for example. The prince is already a king in a way. And so we found that for Gautra, this was a good way of translating Gautra. We preferred this to other translations that were existing at this time. So we borrowed this from him, so thank you. And so these 3 translations of the Gyula Ma clearly exhibit some strong attempt at being faithful to the text, but also a lack of fluidity and style. And they also contain a few mistakes, unfortunately. So although the objective of every translator is to produce an accurate translation, we all know that in order to do so, literalness is not necessarily the best way to express the flavor and strength the text contains. Now, I want to criticize my own translation, not of this one, but my first one. So when I was asked to translate the Gyula Ma in French 7 years ago, as part of my fellowship with the Sadra Foundation, I was really elated to actively research on a subject I had been passively interested about for years, but about which I only had vague ideas. So to embark on this adventure, which I surmise would take me a long journey, possibly without end, I first read Jamgon Kongtrul's long introduction and many other commentaries. But this was really the start, to try to know more about the different interpretations of the Gyula Ma. But by reading all these texts or all these commentaries, I found that I built up some vocabulary that was not really my own. I was just picking up words everywhere, technical words. Then finally I ended up with lists of words. And somehow this was not really my own terminology from really understanding the text. So I was a bit dissatisfied with this. So it seems that when I finished my first draft, or maybe a second or third draft of translation of the root stanzas, I found that I have followed more or less the same tracks as my 3 indigenous friends. My rendering of a root text was also very literal, and I translated Kongtrul's commentary in the same manner as the author wrote it, merely expanding the terse phrases of the original into full grammatical sentences. So my best achievement was that with much effort, I managed to fit each word of the root stanza into the syntax of the commentary, so that by merely reading the words in bold characters in the commentary, you could retrieve the root stanza. But, a great technical achievement for me, but to what profit, really? Although the translation looked like the source text, it was a pale copy, I found, of a root stanza. It remained stiff, artificial, lacking elegance and depth. So this new translation of the Gyulama was not really a big step from the previous ones. So this disappointing result induced me to acquire more knowledge, not so much about the subject matter or on different views about the Tathāgatagarbha, but more insight into the text itself. I needed to do more reading and read more the text, more contemplation, of course, more meditation. This was probably the key, for understanding more. So while doing this, I sort of deconstructed my previous translation, or deverbalized it, as the linguist would say, forgot the words for some time, and started rewriting the text in a much more simple way with my own terminology instead of using borrowed words, which I have found here and there. So this gap between the process of deverbalization and that of recreation is where we find this act of translation happens. And this is the place or the time where one of the many possible translations can then take place. And then you have a phase of recreation, which forces the translator to express the meaning in his own or her own words without really being glued to the text. So the text can then be more personal without being uselessly technical or blindly literal. So after producing what I considered a more satisfactory translation by using the strategy of deverbalization and reconstruction, I showed my translation to my friend, Patrick Carré, for his opinion. I knew Patrick from a long time ago. We had worked on the same project together on, what was it called? Chakchen Dawe by Thakpo Tashi Namgyal. And we have produced a book which I like very much called the Moonbeams of Mahamudra, something like that, Les Rayons de Lune in French. So I showed him the text, and Patrick was very keen and wanted to continue in the same vein, to make the style more poetic and more simple. So this was our way of working with this text, to try our best to treat the text as a long poem. And why poetic? Because since the function of this text is to talk, to the awakened element of a reader, its Buddha nature, or Buddha nature, it seemed to us that poetry was best suited to provide this simple and direct access to the essential meaning. And we wanted also to emphasize the meditative transmission rather than the philosophical one. So we worked in this direction. For us, the Gyulama is an experiential text that expresses the inexpressible through positive terms by using a great number of comparisons, metaphors, and other stylistic and poetic devices. And it's also for us a text that transgresses the classical way of explaining things. Instead of starting as usual with an explanation followed by an illustration, here it reverses the thing, the order. And it starts with the illustration, with a comparison, the example, and then it explains it. And with this, we put a lot of emphasis on the translation of the comparisons, of the illustrations also. And, one of, how should I say, the stanza we really liked about this text was the one, stanza 157, according to our numbering, which says, here there's nothing to add, there's nothing to remove, see reality as it is. When you have seen it, you are liberated. And we used this as an anchor, somehow as an injunction, to emphasize the access to the text. And we have translated into French in in a sort of very pungent way, I would say, by saying, ici, il n'y a rien à ajouter et rien à enlever. Regardez réellement le réel. Quand vous le verrez, vous serez libre. You know, we have all these R alliterations, you know, which make it kind of strong, you know, for us. You know. And for us, we hope that the reader will understand this, which will be like read the text as it really is. When you have read it, then you are liberated. This is what we try to you know, style we wanted to have in this text all the time. Okay, so Patrick, maybe you have more to say about this process of recreation.
Oh yes. Yeah. For the experiential flavor, please excuse my English definitely. Our translations, you know, reflect our minds. We began saying that our guideline in the present talk was the intention to convey the experiential flavor of the text as a reminder or maybe support of meditation. The experience of an object has indeed a flavor which differs from the mental or intellectual knowledge of it by being truer or more concrete than its mere concept of thought. So we dared thinking of something, we were living the adventures of a translator's state of mind. And I myself, when I kind of read and reread and reread and tried to really enter the text, I will dare using the expression Samadhi of translation. Because it's not that bad, you know. Samadhi is just, you see, its mind effortlessly focused on the virtuous object, and it stays on it. And I promise, I really stayed on my text long times just to tame the what Mingyur Rinpoche calls the monkey mind, you know, and it really tamed it. And here, the object is the object I consider, on which I concentrate, is a segment of the text made of words and meanings. And here, mind as consciousness has come with its armies of thoughts and concepts, while mind as primordial wisdom enjoys the great bliss of knowing itself without the slightest confusion. So, but it's the first one which was more. So Christian spoke of deverbalization, meaning that when we have read texts about our text, when we have read tons of things about it, when we have been through the dictionary if necessary, all that is kind of clear in our mind. We can forget the text. We can really forget it, yeah, and trying, because yeah, I'm sorry. So yeah, I really, when translating, especially the verses, I myself was in a kind of I don't know, concentration or trance or something. Anything could fall around me, I would never hear it, and I was just into this thing. But of course, it is not obvious. It doesn't happen each time. You know, maybe one out of 50 or something times. But we have to try to do that, like that. And because there is something interesting, as soon as we are a little bit more concentrated as usual, the mind has a strange thing coming. And for instance, when you have a sentence with a meaning, there are many sentences coming out in French, you know. You just have to pick the one you prefer. Or you write many, and then you keep the best. The one you prefer. But there is nothing automatic, and what I call samadhi is maybe it's not samadhi, of course, yeah, but you see, it's kind of a good concentration. So the text we had to translate was kind of a text which, you know, a text has an action. It's not just flat words on paper. It has an action. So, for instance, it can push us to kind of practice, or it can invite vision. So, we have tried to, by doing that, again, I'm going to the Samadhi thing, there is a moment with silence, and there is a kind of a resurgence of meaning, which gives something unexpected, which is, you know, when Gunther or Hopkins speak, they would say it's kind of a pre-reflexive, pre-noematic intuition. You see, we are not still in the words, Word will come after. Because, you know, with this classical thing, with a view to achieve the speaker's intended effect on the target audience, the absence of distraction boosted by deep reading creates a deep concentration, allowing a completely and positively forgetting of words. As Buddhist practitioners, we know that sometimes on the path, words are obstacles. The same with thoughts. So, during the translation, we tried to keep the lexical and formal units which have equivalence in our language, as for instance, Teshin Shikpin Yingpo, we can say quintessence of the Tathāgatas. I say quintessence because Yingpo is a kind of difficult thing. And saying essence is essence has many Tibetan equivalents. And quintessence, you see, it has something about it. And for the rhythm of the English clauses, and we follow the translation in stanzas, and we were at that time we're in the what we call the third movement after deverbalization, kind of contemplative state, and then reformulation. And so I wanted just some remarks about translation in general. You know that some positivists think mental life is independent of any language. And I think, some people think they think without words. But we all actually thought is not wordless, and it must be even be said that only words think. Words or names start with concepts, the refutation of concepts, which in a strictly mental world amounts to their destruction, leads to the middle way to liberation in the absence of conceptual constructs. So there is also a beginner's classical prejudice, which says the author's words correspond to his or her choice, and they have to be respected for that reason. The only legitimate changes being those that are forced on the translator by the absence of corresponding words and linguistic structures in the target language. But I think this is far too simplistic and amounts to the old song opposing the truthful to the free. And there must also be a certain control, a certain balance between control and creativity in the translator. Because some think that control would oppose to creativity and creativity to control. But control is just truthfulness, creativity is just freedom, and we are again in the old approach. And after, I think, meaning units carried by text segments. Yes, in a text like this or others, we can consider the general meaning of the text, its great idea, like Chinese would say. And we can also enter in the detail of its subjects or in the detail of those details, and then in the elements constituting those details. Each level has one or many meanings, the components of which obey different systems of interpretation. So there are many, thus the multiplicity of the exegetical transmission lineages, for instance. But of all the possible meanings of a text or of something, the deep meaning is the most decisive. It's to such a point that sometimes if you get it, you understand everything. Like in Tibetan we would say chikshe, kunshe or kundre. Yes. I have, my thing is too long, so I will try to go to more funny things. Because I'm sorry, yeah. T'as 10 minutes encore. 11, pardon? T'as 10 minutes encore. Yeah. So there is something we wanted to say. We don't need Shen Tongpa interpreters for this text, because the text by itself is enough Shen Tongpa. This is what I think, yeah? For instance, if you see stanza 158, it looks like the credo of Shantong. So, and the text as action bids us to go further than the frustrating effects of mere philosophical study. But, so, to make something literary, it is not that obvious. That we haven't had recourse to the, let's say, classical prosody, because we have too many sacrifices to do with that. So it was just as it came, but with a special attention to the choice of words, which we have been talking long times and many times. But you see, for instance, a word like Tathāgatagarbha. Many people prefer saying nature de Buddha. So we don't speak of Garbha, we don't speak of Tathāgata. It's just nature de Buddha. In the text, the expressions are totally synonymous. I think there is no problem at all. I thought there was one, but there was not. Even all the authors use both. But you know, when we look for the meaning of Garbha, it is very, as we are Tibetologists, many of us, we can take the Nyingpo interpretation. But then, what can we do to interpret Nyingpo? So I'm a sinologist, so I went to the Chinese. But the Chinese, you know, they say Zhulai Zhang. And Zhang doesn't mean anything interesting. It doesn't mean Nyingpo, and it doesn't mean Garbha. So we have a third choice. Maybe when in Russian or in other languages, we'll see what they say, you see. But there is no solution. And we don't like saying Tathāgatagarbha because it's long and it's full of A, you know. And we all mix up this word here. So, nature de Buddha. But, you know, but I'm again in French. In French, we say, tous les êtres ont la nature de Buddha. All beings have Buddha nature. But in English, there is no la nature de Buddha. There is Buddha nature only. But in French, when we say, for instance, le chien a une nature de chien, we don't say le chien a la nature de chien. It doesn't mean anything. So we say l'homme, tous les animaux, enfin, dans tous les animaux, tous les êtres vivants ont la nature de Buddha. But it doesn't work at all. So we say many things directly translated from English. That's very good. It's fashionable and everything. But it doesn't mean anything. And then when we ask a good Frenchman like me, what does it mean? You know, it comes from English, you know. So we had so much work to do. There is not so many anglicisms in our texts. I hope so. Bad intentioned people will find some, but but you know, I have to conclude. But I want to conclude. I would have loved to say and give examples, but language problem, yeah. And it's in French, you see. But what I really appreciated and what was very creative in terms of poetry, meaning inspiration, because poetry is not only prosody, it's also the meaning of it, which is poetical. Not only forms are poetical, the contents is poetical. So here, for the contents, the main thing is coincidentia oppositorum, paradoxes, and aporia. You see? All those. The coincidence of opposites in general, you know, it's an old thought. Many people thought, like Heraclitus, you know, Anaximander thought that the elements were doing war together. And then Parmenides, for he kind of was less excited than Anaximander. And then Heraclitus had another way of saying all this coincidence. I mean, the white and black, just the same. How is it possible? They're not exactly the same, but they're totally together. And yes, I was thinking also of Nicolas de Cusa, but So, what is in the present treatise? In the present treatise, there is a pure coincidentia oppositorum, the main one. It is the one between Buddhas and sentient beings. And Buddhas, as opposed to ordinary sentient beings, they're totally opposites. But they must have something in common, you know. Both are not only empty in the right way, but above all, they coincide with the truth that Buddhas inhere in sentient beings as Tathāgatagarbha, the enlightened element. And for instance, in Tantra and Huayan Buddhism, contraries collide with each other, which is the way of uniting, Sungju, or Yuganadha, or the rediscovery of one's unity, a state of interpenetration, you know, interfusion, like they say in Huayan. Yeah? But now I have just a little thing to say about oxymorons, which is, an oxymoron is a rhetorical device that uses an ostensible self-contradiction to illustrate a rhetorical point, to reveal a paradox time. So, for oxymorons, as you are all English-speaking people, I will send you back to Romeo and Juliet, you know, the oh, brawling love, oh, loving hate, you know, this passage. But I wanted to go to aporia, and for aporia, aporia in English maybe, and aporia in Greek, I wanted to speak just mentioning Pyrrho of Elis. You know Pyrrho of Elis? Pyrrhonian. So, Pyrrho was a great Greek non-philosopher. And he could not decide reasonably between equally strong contradictory theses on a subject. So it led his mind to stop and rest in a state of ataraxia, which means little nirvana, I think, in translation. And, but in between, there was a kind of training noted down by Timon, Pyrrho's closest disciple, who writes, "We should be without views, uninclined toward this side or that, and unwavering in our refusal to choose, saying about every single one that it is no more than, it is no more, shit, that it no more is than it is not, or it is, or it both is and is not, or it neither is or is not." We're in a tetralemma from Griechenland. It comes from Greece, that's all. And yeah, you have a last thing to say.
Yeah.
short.
Just want to say that our translation is one of the innumerable translations of a highly spiritual text. And we hope there will be many more in the future.
Oh, please, make other ones, please. Thank you for your patience.
Nice. We have a few more minutes for some questions.
Oh, yes, please. I have questions, yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Crowd questions, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very illuminating. I think it's really very important to reflect on how we translate, which words we use. And I was thinking to Italian intellectual, maybe you know Umberto Eco. He wrote a very illuminating book on what is translating. And
Yes, yeah, you did, yeah.
translating, say almost.
Almost, yes.
Say almost the same thing. So I really appreciate this effort that we are trying to do, especially because we are translating from such a deep and complex philosophy into another, and we have all the history of philosophy of India and Tibetan and our languages.
Yeah, and the target thing, yeah.
English or American philosophy. So there was a very deep. I just have a question. How do you translate Shenton and then Shenton in French?
Very literally.
Happy with I mean, I wouldn't translate it as
It works very good. It works very good with Rangtong. It seems it has been done for that. Vide de soi. But for Shenton, it's not so happy. We say vide d'autre. But you say to say vide d'autre, it's a tongue breaker. So we have to find something else. Yeah, one of the principles in poetry is not to, it has to naturally, yeah, as if written by the sky itself. Yeah. Oh, he's into intrinsic things. I'm not very much into those.
There's also, some people say, vacuité intrinsèque.
You still stick to that?
Vide d'autre.
I don't stick to it, really. Yeah. I try never to use it first, and I say Shenton. Because
some people translate also by vacuité intrinsèque et vacuité extrinsèque. Intrinsic or extrinsic entities.
Yeah. But the language, philosophical language is codified by each philosopher, and he wants to give a new meaning to the word of the tribe, and so he just makes his thing, and then the followers follow. But then they make an heresy, and then they change the world. What we wanted to absolutely avoid was this phenomenological language, because it's too free. Everyone writes anything in phenomenology. Husserl began, by creating incredible words, and then the French, they loved it so much to create words, and then the English, it doesn't mean anything now. It is meaning, what do they speak of? They say about awareness or consciousness or where, how, never. Definitely big words like this. No, it doesn't work. Yeah. I'm sorry, I criticize. But poetical language, philosophical language are all specialized languages which must be perfect in their way and not ambiguous at all. All these ambiguities are. So, thank you.
One last side question. That's going to be good. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about any modern or contemporary French literary influences you might have. So that's the one part of the question. But the other part of the question is, do you ever feel like stuck in your own literary time and place? So for instance, so sometimes I look at my translations and I think, that that's just a bad version of a Gary Snyder poem.
Yeah. Yeah. I know exactly what you say. Yeah.
And then what are your, explicit?
Explicitly, I had one poet in mind,
Yeah.
Henri Michaud, especially when he's kissing the sky, yeah? And because he really uses the language in a totally free and open way, which gives meanings which are new meanings, actually. And I think with this book we have new meanings to say to our French or something readers, because they don't know about many things which are in this book. Many things, yeah? This Buddha nature, but emptiness itself, and all those, yeah. And, stop here.
I just want to say that we have 10 copies of this book, so if you are among you French readers who would like to have a copy, you can have one for free. It's
offered by the house. I was afraid he was selling it.